He was woken pretty quick.
Steve, are you good?
Yes.
Okay, I've got 5:30. Does everybody else? All right. All right. It's on. I'd like to call this September 28th Menomonie Area School Board meeting into session. JD, can you take the roll, please?
Penny Burstead.
Here.
Chris Freeman.
Here.
Tony Husey.
Here.
Clint Moses.
Here.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Charlie Schneider.
Here.
Dave Steyer. Jim Swanson.
Here.
Tricia Thompson.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum to conduct business. Anybody have any changes to the agenda as presented? No? Okay. Moving on, we do have one commendation. Jim, if you'd like to read that, that would be great.
You can just sit and read into the microphone. That'd be appropriate.
Yep. The Board of Education of the School District of Menomonie area recognizes Michelle Hubert for taking the lead with the elementary virtual teacher. She provides needed support, great ideas, and feedback for our WVS elementary teachers. Congratulations.
All right, community communications, as of 3 o'clock today, we have none. So we will move on to board member and superintendent communications. Board members, any comments, communications? Oh, Amy?
We all get this magazine. This was the August issue about confronting racism. And it has some really great articles in here. I know we have talked about trying to narrow the achievement gap between minorities. And so I thought this had some really good things in it. I know you have it, so you might want to read it and pick it up, but I just thought it was great. It has some really good ideas, and if we're serious about that, we can maybe utilize some of those ideas in the future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Amy. Anybody else? All right, just a couple things. One, Dave Steyer is not present with us tonight because he and his family at Alfalfa Lawn Farms have the state FFA committee out at their farm tonight. So thank you to Dave for having those folks and our local FFA leaders out at their farm. And also thank you to all of our administrative, all of the staff for all of the hard work they put in the last couple weeks with everything that's been going on with COVID. I hope that some people have had the opportunity to see Dr. Zadowski's posts about Mr. Sterry building walls in the high school, working on some spacing. I know Charlie has assisted in that, so thank you to everyone for everything they're doing to try to get that true 6 feet of social distancing and keeping our kids in schools. So unless anybody has anything else, we'll turn it over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Penny. And like other meetings, I'll kind of defer to the COVID report, which is always lengthy. But I do want to point out that I shared with the board a letter that I received from a high school student. It's always nice to get the student perspective on issues, and we hear from our student council representatives, and that's helpful as well. But if you haven't had a chance, please take a look at that. Also, there's a letter in there from Representative Ron Kind. I did send Representative Kind a message advocating for better broadband access in our area, and I appreciated that Representative Kind got back. He's always real good about responding. And then congratulations to both Jim and Tricia, who have qualified for the WASB Membership Recognition Awards for their time on the school board. So congratulations, Jim and Tricia. And there will be a WASB Regional 4 meeting held virtually on Thursday, October 8th, 7 o'clock p.m. It doesn't look like any registration is needed this year, so you'll be sent a link and you can feel free to join that meeting if you would like. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We've got the personnel consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda?
So moved.
Charlie?
Second.
And we got a second from Chris. Any discussion need to be held on that? Anybody questions? There's only one emergency hire on there. With that being said, Jeannie, please take the vote. Okay, that's approved. 9-0. Great, we'll move on.
Eight. There's only
I'm sorry,
eight.
8, sorry. Thank you. Sorry, 8, I forget, I'm used to 9. Moving on to the action agenda. Our action agenda item tonight is to approve 660301, the Special Ed Services Cooperative Agreement between the district and Eau Claire School District for orientation and mobility services. Joe, do you have comments on that?
I don't know if you want to take a motion. or-
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Jim?
A motion.
Motion, thank you. And do we have a second? And Clint seconding?
I guess I would just say that, when we have unique services that are needed, services that we might not have regularly, oftentimes Tonya will work with neighboring school districts and find a way to staff those services, and that's what we have here. So the board approves a number of these each year, and our recommendation is that the board approves this tonight. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, that being said, Jamie, take the vote, please.
Can you sing it? Sing is open here. Only I can do is close it. Let me just try to reopen it once, so you can see it.
If not, maybe we can do a voice on. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, and that passes 8-0. Moving on to discussion items. We'll get started with the COVID-19 report from Dr. Zadowski.
Very good, Penny, thank you. So just an update, I think everyone is well aware that Dunn County right now is seeing a large increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. This is a situation that we haven't been in terms of being at this type of peak. According to the Dunn County Facebook page, there's now 573 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Dunn County. 374 of those cases have been released from quarantine at the time of this report, and there are currently 199 active cases. Obviously the burden level is high, the trend is increasing, and the activity level is high in Dunn County. I did link in the third bullet point a graph for board members. You can see by looking at that graph that it's very clear that most of the new cases in our county are being seen in young adults. And that doesn't mean that it's not dangerous, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an impact on our school district, but what it means is that it really is one age where you're really seeing the high number of cases. In our schools, we have had 11 student cases reported, 9 of those at the high school, 2 of those at the middle school. We have had 1 staff case so far this school year. So, COVID-19 is absolutely present in our community. At the same time, I'm very happy to report that of the cases we've had, we have nothing to indicate that being in our classrooms or being involved in those school settings is nothing to indicate that our mitigation measures are not working. With the number of cases we've had, the number of exclusions that we've had, if our mitigations weren't working, I think we would see a much different scenario there. So from that standpoint, that is some good news. The guidance for gatherings in Dunn County is still 25 indoor, 50 outdoor. I know there's been some discussion about perhaps dialing that back down. I have not seen anything of that happening yet. It obviously remains important to wash up, back up, and mask up, and that's part of the campaign that our district is participating in with the rest of our community. The governor extended the face mask order for cloth face coverings. The new order is set to expire on November 21st. And I know that that's been a question that's been asked and wondered over and over. Our answer is still the same, that we will follow the governor's order. And if we get to November 21st and the order expires, we'll continue to follow the order unless some subsequent board action is taken. So face masks will continue to be an important piece to our mitigation strategies. We did have a shift in our plan for instructional models. We've talked a little bit about this before. When we were planning in the summer, when we did not think that we could get to 6 feet in all of our classrooms, the plan was if we got to this point that we would be looking at more of a blended instruction model at the high school level because we thought we would have to do that to reduce our enrollment and get 6 feet across the board. Thanks to some great work by our principals, our teachers and staff at Menomonie High School, we were able to rearrange the entire schedule. I think Penny mentioned it. I walked over there and it brought tears to my eyes. Mr. Sterry came over and said, "Mr. Z, do you mind if I make a wall?" Tech head teacher, what a great person. And we have temporary walls, we have spaces that we had not planned on using as classrooms, and we have teachers that were really willing to get creative. And by doing that, we're able to have every single class now at 6 feet. Again, it wasn't that the lesser distance, we haven't found that to be problematic in terms of the spread of COVID, but the way our health department is working, we are following the strictest of guidelines in terms of contact tracing, and that was one thing that we really did not anticipate. We felt really good about our plan in terms of mitigating the spread, but what we found out quickly with our first case is that with the county health department identifying any close contact as anybody within 6 feet, that was excluding a large number of students. And that's been very, very difficult to deal with. Our students and staff have done a great job though. But I really am so excited that last week we had the entire week with all classes of at least 6 feet of distancing, and we have that moving forward. I would anticipate that before second quarter comes and the class schedule changes, there's going to be a lot more work that needs to be done, but I know that it's possible to get to that 6 feet. With the health department, there's been a lack of direction at the state level in terms of guidance for closing schools, and we've been working close with our health department in terms of what that decision might look like. And there's a number of internal decisions that need to be made in terms of if we ever think that our mitigation efforts aren't effective, if we have issues with staffing and the ability to staff our plan, those things would all come into play. But from a strict data perspective, what we're really tracking is the number of student exclusions, which would include cases, quarantine for close contact, or people isolated for symptoms. Right now, our school district is tracking under 10% for the number of exclusions district-wide. However, we did have a peak last week at the high school where we got above 20% in terms of the number of students that needed to be excluded. A high majority of those were students, however, that were excluded because of the proximity to the first few cases of COVID, and most of those students will be coming back this week. And we already saw today that our exclusion rate at the high school went down below 20%. But if we got to the point where there were enough symptoms and cases and quarantines where we had that 20% of our students excluded, really the graphic talks over a 4-week time period, we would be looking at having to look at the virtual option. If we have a real big spike where it was closer to 50% on any given day, that's also something we would have to consider. But the health department continues to be great in working with us. And like that graph shows, in Dunn County right now, it is a certain age group that is really seeing the spike in cases. And the mitigation efforts that I know the university is doing, that our community is doing to try to deal with that, still try to keep things open as possible in the rest of the county. I know Stout is really ramped up their testing, and I think they're doing a great job testing and isolating students, which should help. But as we continue to look at this situation, if at some point this spike starts to be seen in a broader sense across our community, I think you'll see the health department with some additional recommendations. I mentioned tracking data. That's something that we are building a data dashboard for our school district. It's pretty tricky because, you know, there's a lot of sensitive data that goes with this, and we want to be very careful because we know parents want to be informed. We know that community members want to be informed. We think that's very, very important, and I think we do a very good job of that in our school district. But we also have to be very careful with protecting the privacy of individual students and staff members. So we continue to provide weekly updates. Those updates have expanded, if you've noticed, the last couple of weeks. And we'll continue to share local data, but we'll be sharing that data in a way that protects the privacy of individuals. I already talked about the distancing in the classrooms. I don't think there's a whole lot more to mention there. Other than, again, we don't feel like we have any evidence of transmission occurring in the hallways or during the lunch periods or upon arrival or departure from school. So from that standpoint, I'm very, very proud of the work that our staff has done to keep our schools very, very safe. In the section about student and staff attendance, which I already talked about quite a bit, I want to point the board to two links. The second to the last bullet, linked in are some guidelines for providing academic support. And that's another area where, and this is a learning experience, it really is for all of us. And I really feel like our team is doing a great job learning along the way, reacting to the data in a good manner. And this would be an example of that. With the number of students that have been quarantined, having protocols for how we're supporting those students is critically important. And it's not easy to develop protocols though, because in some situations the student may be really young, in some situations the student may have special learning needs. In some situations, the content that the teachers are teaching may lend itself better to remote instruction than others. So our teachers are doing a terrific job. They're using Google Classroom or Seesaw at the lower levels and providing learning opportunities for these kids. We're actually streaming some lectures, some classes, I think especially in the math area at the high school. Other teachers have been very creative and using resources that are already put together, or they're making some of their own resources. And I know that with assessments, some of our teachers have had to get much more creative in terms of how they're assessing student progress. So that link is in there for you to review. I appreciate the work that Brian and our principals and our other staff members had in putting that together. So those guidelines, along with some other updates, have been added to the reopening plan, and that's also linked in there in the very next bullet. And I just want to point out to the board, we tried to identify the changes in red because it's a pretty lengthy document, and we wanted to make sure people knew what the changes were. So scrolling through, the first one I'd like to talk about is on page 7, and that's just mentioning those protocols for providing support for students who are excluded. Those are linked in there and called out. On page 8, we talked more about the physical distancing. That changed in our school district, as I already mentioned, especially at the high school. And then on page 9, we wanted to do a better job calling out the expectation for students or staff members who should be quarantined or not coming to school under certain situations where they may be waiting for a pending test result, or if they have symptoms. It was really quite frustrating. Our first couple cases, a large number of exclusions could have been prevented had people done a better job staying home when they're waiting for the result of a test. I have to cough, but I don't want to freak anybody out. Excuse me. I just had to clear my throat. So hopefully that'll help. We've sent it out in messages. We've talked about it at staff meetings, and anything anybody can do to help us spread that word. And I know it's hard, especially if people are home for 14 days. People don't like being at home for 14 days. But in some cases, it's a few days, waiting for a test to come back. And coming to school in that situation when you're waiting for a test result, even if your symptoms are so slight, or you have no symptoms at all, if that test comes back positive, That's a huge, huge ordeal, not only for our school district, but also for our county health department. The amount of work it takes to contact trace every single case is enormous. And especially with the number of cases that we're seeing in Dunn County now, we really need people to partner with us and stay home and stay distanced in the event that they have symptoms or they're waiting for that test result. Also, Sam in the HR department put some additional guidance together for staff. That's linked in towards the bottom of page 10. And I think that's it for the updates this week. Board members, I know you haven't had a chance to review many of these updates. Things have been moving 100 miles an hour, and I would have liked to get this stuff out to you sooner. But as you go through those, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email, shoot me a text, give me a call. I'd love to get your input and talk through any of this or any questions that you might have.
Clint?
You addressed it a little bit, but obviously one of the problems, or challenges I should say, that's unfolded in this thing is the number of exclusions that happen early at the high school.
Yep.
I know one particular young man that was out for 10 days, then he came back for 2 days, and he was tagged with an exclusion because of the distancing. So that kid has missed out on 24 days of school, well, not 24 days of school, but 24 days total exclusion, so probably roughly 3 weeks. With our block schedule at the high school, 2 weeks equals a month.
Yeah.
So there definitely has to be something in there, and it puts more challenge obviously on the teachers as well. For these students that are supposed to be doing in person, now all of a sudden they get tagged for 14 days and they're out of school for roughly a month worth of school equivalent for a block schedule. So to try and make that up and be equitable on these high school students when their GPA is on the line and college future and everything else is on the line, we need to make sure we're doing something fair and we're providing services to those students, because they are following the rules and the guidelines set. I know they're strict. To me, and I guess 2 questions for you, Joe, is do we now have 100% 6-foot distancing at the high school so that that doesn't happen like it did the first week or 2 of class?
Yes.
And then another interesting little microcosm experiment is, have any of the exclusion students tested positive that we know of? So any of the kids that have been marked to be out of school, have they tested positive?
My understanding is that some exclusions have tested positive, but it's important to note that exclusions can be excluded for many different reasons. In terms of someone being excluded just because they were sitting at a desk next to a positive case, the answer is no. I am not aware of one case that resulted from that. The cases that I'm aware of have to do more with students who may have been gathering over the weekend with each other without face masks or other mitigation protections in place. Students who have chosen to share food or share water bottles, more things like that.
That, just for clarification, that was really my point, is I think mitigation measures that we do have in place at the school, and just like at the university, seem to be working. It's those outside events that are precipitating a lot of these cases.
Yeah, and again, we're looking at 9 at the high school, so it's not like there's a ton of them, but even one case is of concern for us here in the school district. But you're right, Clint, we can't control what happens outside of the school, which is one reason I think it is important that we have activities for students. But those activities also do carry higher risk. And, we saw that with one of our early activities where, I think, students sometimes, it takes all of us, some time to get used to the changes and used to the expectations. And I think that decision-making is more difficult when you're not inside the less structured the environment is, the more difficult it is in terms of all the decisions that have to be made to protect yourself and your friends. But in terms of the students needing support, I've been very impressed with what our teachers have done. Like anything else, some teachers have done better than others. I think the guidance that Brian and his team put together is helpful, but we also realize that that's not a silver bullet. Parents and students are going to need to continue to work closely with the teachers. And I can tell you that from my perspective, and I'm sure that our teachers feel the same way, is they're going to do everything possible to support those kids. And if that, requires extended deadlines, we have processes for providing an incomplete grade if more time is needed for someone to come back and make up work, or they need additional instruction once they come back. But what I'm really hopeful and optimistic about is I think the number of exclusions is going to be reduced dramatically as we get into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I think you're going to see that number come way down. But I feel terrible about it. If there was one thing I would have done differently, everything we did, we were focusing on the health and safety of the kids, which is always our number one goal, our number one priority. But when we were looking at that with the health department, we felt comfortable, and the health department gave us their blessing for the plan of having those desks 4.5, 5.5, feet apart. But what was not made clear to us is that was going to require exclusions. There's a number of school districts that are not doing that. Their health department, it's either their health departments aren't making them, or they're simply not reporting it. We're not doing that here in Menomonie. We're following the rules as provided to us by the health department. Our health department is following up very closely, and our school nurse, Ramey McMahon, has done a terrific job, and I have all the trust in the world in Ramey to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our students and staff safe. So as frustrating as it is, as difficult as it has been, I think we're doing the right thing. My understanding is that the local health departments have gone to the state to try to relax that requirement, considering the face mask, considering the activity these kids are doing when they're stationary at a desk. But I don't think that's gone anywhere. So at this point, it's too late for us. So we've made the adjustments, so we're going to move forward.
Thank you.
Jim?
So the original plan had 3 levels: in-person, blended, and safe at home.
Yeah.
And you've talked about in-person and safe at home as kind of the blended kind of sort of just gone away because of the extra distancing. You think it's not necessary or looking at it at all anymore?
Jim, that's still in our toolbox, and we've talked about that with the health department, especially when the contact tracing ramped up so rapidly here. There could be a benefit at some point of going reduced enrollment at the high school or middle school levels. I would not anticipate that though, based on what we know today. But there's things changing so much. Again, if all of a sudden we started seeing spread that we felt was contributed to the arrival times, departure times, hallway transition times, or during their lunch times, when that higher density of population would be more apt to cause that to happen, then I think we would look at making a change. But right now, there's nothing to indicate that that's been a problem. So I don't want to just throw it out of our toolbox yet, but I would anticipate that either will be in person or safer at home, if I was to guess which of the learning models we would utilize this year.
Okay. One other question. Sure. I've read other places where 6 feet and also 15 minutes of contact, like in a room and stuff, is also noteworthy for exclusions and follow-ups and contact tracing and all that. Has there been any discussion with the health department about having to use a 15-minute rule also?
Yes,
Which
Jim.
would pretty much clean out a whole classroom, I would imagine.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. The guidance is 6 feet and 15 minutes.
Okay.
So if those classes were less than 15 minutes, there wouldn't have been the exclusions.
Okay.
But because all class periods are more than 15 minutes, it resulted in the exclusion.
Okay.
Amy?
So how do you respond to constituents and parents that contact us and say to us that we're not following our own plan, that they said that they'd get to a threshold and then the next phase would start and so forth. I did see a response that you gave to somebody that did write to all of us, but I was just, concerned about that because there are a lot of people out there that are concerned for the safety of their children and their families.
Thanks for the question, Amy, and yeah, I did respond to a number of questions like that right away. And I guess, I would resort back to the plan that I believe we are following. We did talk, and we, in my weekly updates, I put in there a number of times that if we get to these thresholds, we may have to look at additional mitigation measures. And, what the plan says is that these mitigation measures may include moving instruction to the blended learning or safer at home learning environments. Please understand that plans and thresholds may change during the year as more becomes known. So, yes, if you would have asked me August 26th, if we were at this point right now where I thought we would have been, I would have thought we would have been in the blended learning plan. But a couple key things we didn't know at that time. One, we had no idea how many kids were going to take virtual, and we had no idea how many classrooms were going to not have the 6 feet. What turned out is we got to 2/3 of the classrooms right away. All the classrooms K-8 and 2/3 of the classrooms 9-12 were at 6 feet already. So it really was only 1/3 of the classes at the high school that we had to figure out, and that was doable. Now, when we get to second quarter, depending on class enrollments and such, I still anticipate that we'll be able to get to 6 feet, but for some reason, if we can't, then I think we would maybe have to look at an alternative model where we could be reducing enrollment and going to the blended plan. I don't think we'll do that. I think our teachers and our principals will look at class rosters and move classes around to utilize the spaces that we have, but it is a tool that we could have to use at some point.
So I have a couple of clarification questions.
Sure.
One is, well, first of all, when does second quarter start?
Brian, do you know the exact day?
It's in January, I can get it real quick.
Second quarter?
Oh, I'm sorry, second quarter, sorry, not second semester.
It's on the school district calendar. I think it's October
Something in October?
15th or something.
Something like that.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, I don't have.
So it's coming
it.
up soon, okay.
End of October.
Okay. I know that the health department has said that they are struggling with doing the contact tracing for all the cases because they're increasing so fast. So are we doing contact tracing then?
We're doing our own contact tracing for stuff that happens in school.
Okay,
So for the classrooms, Ramey is going through seating charts, interviewing the teachers and students as needed.
okay,
But stuff that happens outside of school is up to the county.
right, okay, that makes sense. So I'm hearing from students, several students, that before and after school can be kind of chaotic at times.
Mhm.
How are you feeling about how things are going in terms of the social distancing there?
I think that would be one of the areas where it's not, well, it obviously is not as effective as when the students are in the classrooms. I know our principals continue to work with the students to try to improve it. But what I can say is that another thing we're seeing is that many of those groups are what you would consider to be cohorted groups. It's probably the same group of students that's getting together outside of the school day as well. But they are wearing masks. Our kids are doing a very good job with the use of masks. Even though they might not be 6 feet, for some of those time periods, most of those time periods are less than 15 minutes. So I think that is helpful. And there still are a lot of benefits with the hand sanitation and those other mitigation measures. But that's another reason why it's so important that if people do have symptoms or if they're supposed to be quarantined because they're waiting for a test, it would be a good thing not to be in school at all.
Yeah, and the last thing is more, I don't know, kind of a statement, is that I've just been hearing more about kids who are saying that I refuse to get tested because I don't want to be quarantined and I don't want my family, to be quarantined. So I mean, it's unfortunate. It's just unfortunate overall, but I'm sure, I don't know if you've heard that as well. But
It's a huge challenge. In fact, I think the CDC came out with an article last week. I think I saw that they were estimating that 50% of cases, people are not cooperating with contact tracing efforts. And that's a huge limitation. But again, if you look at the cases, and you look at that trend line, in almost every age category, it's a real slow increase in Dunn County. And then you have 2 age categories that have huge increases. Now, our students are part of one of those age categories, but we do have the data that shows us how many cases we have. And when we're talking about 2,800 students going to school for in-person instruction, and we have 11 cases, even though those 11 cases are very concerning, it really is quite a low percentage, and hopefully we can keep it that way. And again, I do think, and I want to reiterate that had some of the mitigation measures not just promoted by our school district, but by everybody then followed, like not sharing a water bottle or something like that, I think that number would be maybe even half of what it is today.
Chris?
Yeah, I had the same questions Clint did, thinking about how we can make allotment for those kids, because just knowing, because I already got kids out in my classes, and when you miss, 2 weeks, that's hard. You miss that times 2 when you're done. So I was happy to hear, but I only heard it in passing, that you had planned to have measures for kids to have incompletes. And I think that's super important. But I was wondering, like, especially the classes that have got labs. So if I do writing labs, they miss that. They can't make that up in any kind of time that would even be conceivable unless it was outside of the course of the semester. So are we going to have some ways in which we can see like a winter break team put together to try and get those kids caught up? Because like Clint says, even though Brian has put together a list of do's and don'ts, there's the reality that and especially if we start in the second quarter, we're not going to have 6 weeks distancing in all those classes, and now we know full well that then we're going to have to take those exclusionary measures. It seems to me that we should have a structure set up over the winter break, and it seems to me that those teachers should be paid outside of their normal contract to try and really do our best to make sure we get those kids through to finish on time, especially if they're seniors, because this is going to be super stressful for them. And just because I know, because Rowan's got a friend who's been out, and maybe she's not the best student, and that causes a huge wave of anxiety if you don't know exactly how you're going to get caught up, especially if you've got 2 working parents. And so there's lots of stress that's going on around here, and I would just like to see a little more proactive way in which we can make sure that we got a safety net that people are aware of, that lets them know that we got a plan for making sure those kids won't fall through the cracks, especially if they're victimized by the exclusionary measures we have had to take. So that was one thing that I hope we could kind of work together, and especially making sure that teachers are compensated because they're doing so much extra work. I mean, think about having to put together these lessons plans. Like, you got your in-class kids, and then you got up to 20% of your class is missing for 2 weeks, and then you have to somehow try to manage them. That's going to be a lot of stress for everybody. So in light of that, it would seem that if we had some measures to make sure we could get those kids through, to give everyone a little bit of a breather, it would be good for our teachers and it would be good for our students and their parents. And the second thing I was thinking about was, let me see if I can remember what that second thing was.
Do you want me to answer that? Will you think about the second one?
Yeah, that sounds good.
So first of all, I want to make sure it's really clear. We fully anticipate to have 6 feet when second quarter starts. So I'm not exactly sure what you said there, but
Oh, you just have to mention that. If there
we
is no problem in the second quarter.
fully anticipate that we're going to find a way to make that happen.
Which is November 6th, by the way.
Thank you.
About 10 minutes to find it.
Thank you, November 6th. Susan Momsen, she's one of the assistant principals at the high school, she's already working on second quarter. So we fully anticipate that to happen. But in terms of supporting the students, I don't know that we could wait till winter break to do that, especially with the way our block schedule is. And if you think about it, even though it's a challenge because some of these students who have missed a larger chunk, at least it's a larger chunk of only a smaller number of classes. And the way that they built the schedule at the high school, there is study time every single day built in. So when the students come back, it's going to be a lot, but they will have an opportunity where they can seek out those teachers, make up those labs, get that extra help that they need. And my understanding is that the students who have been gone, the symptoms have been very, very light. And hopefully that continues. So I think in most cases, these students are continuing with their work, and it's not the same. I fully acknowledge that. Not being in class is hugely detrimental. But, like I mentioned, our teachers are doing a great job being creative. There are so many more tools out there nowadays than there used to be. I think they're doing a good job using those tools. But if we do need to add additional services or additional time or change our policies with incompletes, everything is on the table right now. Did you think of your second item, Chris?
No, because I was listening to you. Okay, the second item. Thank God you stopped. You got so much to say. It reminds me of someone else I know. The thing that I wanted to ask is that since this is everything is moving all the time. And I totally appreciate when people ask me, why are the goalposts moving? I'm like, well, they're not exactly moving because we use the subjunctive may. These things might be this, but then they might be something else. And that seems from the outside to give us, as a board, a lot of wiggle room. So what would be super helpful to address that is you just do here when we have our school board meetings. You remember when you did that one great town hall style meeting for parents and for teachers?
Yeah, we did a bunch of those, yeah.
So, well, I apologize for not getting the number correctly, but it seems to me that that might be a useful way in which that you could address a lot of parents and teachers' concerns about why things are moving, what it looks like, because after you explain what's going on and people get their heads around what you're explaining and why, that becomes a lot more understandable than having these figures that we once put out there at the end of summer that now aren't seeming to be valid by other people. So I'd strongly encourage you, as the leader of the district, to go out there and use your expertise to try to alleviate people's concerns and help understand what actually is going on, or how we're making decisions, and why they make sense for their kids. And then for faculty too, or I guess you call them teachers, to make sure that they understand that these aren't putting them in jeopardy, but there's a science behind it that kind of makes sense for them. So I thought that would be a really good show, that we're trying to meet them where they're at, rather than having them try to play catch up without the same information that we all have.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? All right, Joe, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think that's good.
Okay, perfect. Then let's move on to discussion item 4B, student enrollment update, third Friday in September report.
So,
Back to you, Joe.
so you can see that our numbers are down. Last year at this time we had 3,411 counted. This year we have 3,270. But please understand, this is not the actual count. This is just a preliminary number based on the number of people in our schools. Tony and her team are doing a great job. They have to go through and they have to factor. Some students don't count as a full FTE, some count like 4-year-old kindergarten as 0.6. So they'll continue to finalize the count and then get that to the board at our next meeting. Tony, is there anything else to add to that?
You summed it up very well.
Any questions from anyone? Thank you.
Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on to item 4C, 2021 health insurance renewal.
So our health insurance committee met last week, and the news is good. We continue to do very well with our self-insured health insurance fund. At this point, we are not anticipating any increases to the premiums. I appreciate Leah, who did the lion's share of work working with our consultant. And really the major change that we're looking at this year is we have what's called a teledoc, a virtual opportunity for people to get care over the computer for many cases, or telephone. In many cases that care can be sufficient for what people need. And it's a lot less expensive, not only for our plan, but also for the individual. In working with Medica, the group that administers our plan, we are no longer going to have to contract that service out. We can actually include that into our plan. It still will be at no cost to the individuals. It will cost our plan, but we anticipate that cost for our plan will be less than what we're contracting out right now. So we think that's a very good change. We'll continue to track the numbers. If claims go up, then obviously our cost is going to go up. But we've put ourselves in a great situation where for January 1st, we're definitely not recommending any kind of increase to the premiums. And I don't anticipate that to happen July 1st either. But we reserve July 1st. We don't commit to that at this point, just based on the unknown. Any questions on the health insurance renewal?
Clint?
Probably in there, and I didn't read it, but is there any change to benefit to the staff as far as like co-pays or deductibles?
No.
Okay.
I should clarify. There is, if you recall, we built in a high deductible plan that we wanted to provide that as an option. Not many of our staff members take that.
That just started last year, right?
Right. That had a slight change just based on what Medica had to do to make that plan work. Do you have anything to add to that, Leah? That was the only one I recall.
They explained it as a regulatory change that Medica is implementing. It's not something we chose. It's the out-of-pocket and out-of-network limits that are increasing, and it's due to regulations. And the regular deductible and co-pays, that stays the same. It's just the limits if you go out-of-network or out-of-pocket.
Any other questions about health insurance?
Well, and sorry, Chris, listed in here, it says we only currently have 2 employees on that high deductible plan, so out of everyone.
Correct.
So Chris, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I don't understand all these things. And I know that PM is per member. What is PS? Is that a variation of that it says how much we have to pay PM? There's a commentary that was made by Tanya, whoever.
Yeah.
Was. And I was looking it up to try to figure what it was, but it doesn't seem to be like a common nomenclature in insurance, so I didn't know what that was.
That's a good question. I'm not sure myself. I would
Maybe it
have
was
to
just a
check
typo,
with
I
her.
thought. Because we couldn't find anything on that. Okay.
Yeah, I will check with her. I'll put that in my weekly update.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, Charlie?
Just real quick, so Medica is going to provide what Teladoc was providing, is that the deal?
Yes.
Okay. Very great, very good service, and important that you continue to have that, I think.
Okay, anybody else? All right, if not, moving on to item D, review of the final budget revisions for 2019-2020.
Leah, why don't you go ahead and take this one, please?
Sure. So at the end of each school year in the fall here, we always do one last final budget revision from the prior year. And the majority of these revisions are due to year-end site revisions, which would be a net zero difference. We had to make the Fund 46 transfer revision, that's included in this revision list. And then we had a couple grants. All of the Fund 27 special education revisions are grant related, and then just a couple other slate grant revisions. Other than that, it was just kind of normal year-end expenditures and revisions related to that.
Questions?
So Penny, just to clarify, we will be bringing back the health insurance renewals and the budget revisions. We'll be bringing those back to the regular meeting in October for board approval.
I apologize, yep, October 12th, those will be action items. But does anybody have any questions on budget? All right, moving on. Letter E, Youth Services Officer Memorandum of Understanding.
So this is a MOU that I've been working on with Chief Atkinson, and this is more operational in nature, but I felt it was very important for the board to see this and to be able to provide input. And I appreciate the board members that got back to me with a few ideas. So you can see that in the attachment that was uploaded, I called out the changes with highlight. And a few things. One is we wanted to make sure that we did a better job emphasizing the importance of fostering positive relationships. All along, that's one of the major pieces of this entire program is for the Youth Services Officer to establish those positive relationships with our students, staff, parents, and community members. And they do a very good job of doing that. But even though most of this document is talking about information sharing and more of those operational pieces, we don't want that to get lost in the shuffle. And we want to make sure we call it out that every student, all students apply here, not just a select few. We also want to talk about the contributions the YSO has for positive school climate, serving as a role model. And then we also needed to add information about the community piece, the community service piece, and actually I don't see that in there. I apologize. I will upload that for you to see, but as you know, the second Youth Services Officer is a community-based position, and we use our community service fund to fund that position. So we wanted to call that out, and I will put that updated draft in there for the board, where you can essentially see that a couple things. One is that this position isn't just specific to the school district of the Menomonie area. It serves our whole community. It's not just tied to school hours. There are duties with this position that are beyond the school hours, and that they will document the work they do with other service clubs, other organizations in our community having to do with the Youth Service Officer, anything they're doing to promote safety for our children and even though it's through the school district, that position is a community-based position. Any questions at all?
Chris?
Yeah, I just to get some background on this. Is this based on, because we've had youth services officers working with our school before, right?
Yes.
So we had previous policy regarding what they did and what they didn't do in their relationship with the schools that's similar and not highlighted in what we have now.
There's an intergovernment agreement, but that really is more focused on the finances that has to do with the position. And both the chief and I felt it was important to document what the expectations were in terms of the information sharing and the things that are in this document. So no, prior to that, it really was absent in terms of having written documentation for this.
Clint?
My question is kind of a nuts and bolts question as far as the HR part of it. Who decides what candidate gets hired for this? Is it a joint effort with the school district, or is it something that Chief Atkinson kind of picks from his force, or would it be a new hire, I guess? I guess it's...
Ultimately, it's under the police department's jurisdiction. However, we have had a very good partnership. Our principals have actually been able to sit in on the interviews and be able to provide input. And the way that it works is that it's a 4-year term. And that's important to us because we think continuity is important for the school district, for the students and the families. And now that there are 2 officers, those terms are going to be staggered so that we're not bringing on 2 brand new officers in a year. And it isn't just like they, hire someone new, brand new, green, never been a police officer before. There's a lot of training that goes into this. And my understanding from the chief is that there are a number of people that in our community that are interested in this position. So it's a sought after position, and we appreciate, the ones that I have had an opportunity to work with here in Menomonie have just been terrific.
Chris?
Okay, and I know that you guys are gonna hate me for asking this question, but I'm willing to risk a little more hate, just to point out a possible inconsistency in terms of our recent actions on our school board. And that is just, and I'm glad that you made this distinction, like really I am, because I thought the action you took previously was not at all the right thing to do. But number 8, go down to that. It says, absent a real and immediate threat to student, teacher, or public safety, incidents involving public order offenses, and this is something we just dealt with, right? Incidents involving public order offenses, including disturbances, disruptions of schools or public assembly, loitering, profanity, and fighting that doesn't involve physical injury or a weapon, shall be considered school discipline issues to be handled by school officials rather than criminal law issues warranting formal law enforcement intervention, e.g., issuance of criminal citations, ticket summons, or a filing of a petition. And so I thought I would just bring it up because the majority of the board thought it was perfectly valid to actually involve the legal authorities in exactly that incident. So we may want to think about, just for consistency's sake, that either we amend that to allow any disruption of a public assembly at the school be liable for police intervention, or we might want to rethink our stance on recent events at our own public assembly. And we can discuss this further when it comes back for discussion.
I don't think that this is going to be something that will end up as a vote at this point. I don't know.
No, it really isn't, not unless the board has an issue, but I did upload the new draft, and I apologize for that. It must have grabbed the old one. Everything is the same except if you go to number 13, the community service piece, that's what I mentioned in terms of working with the community.
I think you wrote this together with the police chief?
Yes.
It just seems that advertising a lot to suggest that our own police force doesn't think that use of the police's time would be for the types of disturbances that just took place at our public assembly for profanity. So I really would encourage us we have another opportunity to try to be consistent and try to do right by the way in which that we want to go forward.
Well, and I'm going to step in for 1 second, then Jim, you're next, because you were on before Chris, and then Clint. It begins with absent a real and immediate threat. I think that there were multiple board members that felt threatened in that situation or have felt threatened in the past. So that changes the dynamic a little bit of that. Jim, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I think it's good that you're spelling out the difference between what the law enforcement does and the school district handling discipline. That's usually where these programs really run into trouble. And so I think you're really addressing it, and which is good.
Thank you.
Clint, you had a comment?
You pretty much covered it, but if reading, kind of going along with what Chris is saying here, and you've got absent a real and immediate threat to student, teacher, public safety, or school safety, and absent the citation described here in formal law enforcement intervention, is that first part there. That, I mean, I know it's a little subjective because it depends on if the person perceives threat. I may not perceive threat and think it's no big deal, but Tanya or Charlie might be scared over there because of what's going on in the room, might need protection or law enforcement to step in. So that's the part, I think it kind of covers that. I know what you're getting at, Chris, but.
Chris.
A specific charge that we had was to investigate a board member for abuse of profanity, and that's specifically excluded from the policy here. So that's problematic because that was the specific terms of the investigation that was open, and that's specifically excluded from the 8 of the policy. So that's the issue, and that's the problem that we've had all along. So I think that maybe it might be nice if we don't often have board retreats, but it might be nice if we could talk through this when we're not on camera, and we could talk about how we make consistent ways in which we try to preserve I guess a sense of fair play for all people involved.
Well, in full openness to Steve and his crew, even a board retreat can be attended by the public.
So true.
So.
Right there. Yep. Take that one back.
So just so you're aware. Anybody else? All right. If not, let's move on. So we are on to item F. Just purely informational, reviewing the extracurricular staff contracts and requests. Anything to say, Joe? Any questions? Perfect. Then we will move on to item G. Items related to the next board meeting. Our next board meeting is October 12th, and I'm assuming Dave will be back, so you won't have to listen to me talk all day. And then we've got another meeting the 26th. Anybody else? No? Anything else? All right, with that being said, can I get someone to make a motion to end the meeting? We got Jim and Tanya as a second. Thank you, everybody.
You got a whole.
Hey, thanks,
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. All in favor?
Aye.